Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tending to Change. I'm your host, Jeni Juarez. So, I'd like to begin today's episode by talking a little bit about what I mean when I'm talking about waking up or a spiritual awakening, because there's so much confusion, I think, around this word or around this idea of waking up. Now that this idea of being woke is being weaponized by politicians and culture wars, which is super unfortunate, but I mean, that's a totally different conversation. So when I'm talking about waking up or waking up to life or awakening, I'm talking about a state of expanded awareness or clarity. It's a non-conceptual, meaning no thought involved, bodily insight or revelation that totally shatters the illusion of who we think we are and the illusion of separation between us and the rest of life. It's accompanied by this bone-deep feeling that we're part of a much bigger story. And it's this profound experience of unconditional love. It's often referred to as waking up from the small self or the ego self. And what the ego is it's the package of our thoughts and our personalities and our interpretations and storylines of who we think we are and what's going on all around us. It's life filtered through the mind. And so often we get caught up in our ego, in our roles of who we think we are, like a parent, a child, employee, friend, lover. And then all those deeper personality labels that we put on ourselves, like I've mentioned before, like a perfectionist, lazy, athletic, weak, bossy, shy. All of these are storylines. They help inform how we move through the world. But the problem is we overly identify with them. We see our ego self as a fixed truth or the ultimate reality of who we are. But actually, it's very malleable. It's very changeable and relative. In neuroscience, they call it neuroplasticity. And this is a lot of what mindfulness in the current Western culture is focused on. It's an understanding that the brain is malleable, that we can change the way we see things and the way we think about things. And so even though so much of it gets routinized at a young age, our minds are adaptable. And I've mentioned before that oftentimes what has to happen for us to get this brief moment of awakening, this shift from ego consciousness into pure consciousness, is a profound shakeup to our lives. It's a death or a divorce or a life-changing injury or illness or some catastrophic loss. It's something that shifts the ground of your thoughts about how things are in life. And oftentimes, it's just a brief moment, a flash even, of open-eyed, deep, visceral understanding of whatever I thought life was, it's not. Ram Dass, who's one of my beloved teachers, he dedicated his entire life to understanding different levels of consciousness, helping others, and cultivating loving awareness. His life story and teachings are exquisite. So if you're curious, I highly recommend looking more up about him. He wrote a book called Be Here Now in the 70s, which was like a well-known guidebook for all spiritual seekers back in that really pivotal paradigm moment. A beautiful quote by him is, "Once you get that first glimpse of living spirit, once your heart opens even for a moment to unconditional love, everything in your life becomes grist for the mill of your awakening. That awakening is from ego consciousness, your limited self, to the big S self, the universal spirit that's present in each of us, the God consciousness." So looking back at my own life, as a child, I was so playful and imaginative and joyful. I mean, all of us are for varying lengths of time, depending on our experiences. But at home, things were really challenging. My mother struggled with depression and grief, having lost her dad when she was 3 months pregnant with me. And this set the stage for a rather difficult marriage and early life with my dad. They had some drinking issues, and there was a lot of unhealed childhood wounds in both of them. And it wasn't that my life was always just terrible, but there was a lot of chaos and arguing and fighting. And ultimately, my mom decided to leave my dad when I was 8 years old. Their divorce spanned 5 years from when I was 8 until I was 13. It was essentially a 5-year custody battle over me. I was an only child until my mom reconnected with her high school sweetheart and gave birth to my sister when I was 10. So that was a really difficult time. Anyone whose parents got divorced when they were young know that this deeply shifts your world. So in a way that could have been an awakening, but I was really too young to grasp what was going on. So for me at that time, it felt more like drowning, like I just could not make sense of my world anymore. And being a very sensitive child, I became really fearful, and I was just in this constant state of distress and anxiety. And this only got worse as I entered into middle school. I had gained a lot of weight during my parents' divorce. So by the time I was in 5th grade, I was in like a men's 42 waist jeans. And in the 90s, it wasn't as common to be overweight or obese. So I definitely stood out like a sore thumb. I got bullied pretty relentlessly. As an example, I remember sitting on the beach once when we were camping and I'm playing in the sand. I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and this car full of teenage boys drive past me and they just start mooing at me as I'm sitting there. I'm minding my own business, playing by myself. And this is just one small example of the way I was really terrorized for my physical experience. So that led into eating disorders and depression, and the chaos at home caused me to develop some obsessive compulsive behaviors because having everything feel so out of control, I wanted to control anything that I could. So I had to have perfect hair and perfect skin and perfect nails. And I took all honors classes and I got straight A's, and I just really had to constantly strive to be perfect because it was as if I believed that if I did everything exactly right, two things would happen. One, people would love me, and I really just wanted to feel loved and accepted. And two, I would be protected from harm or failure or disappointment. And of course, that's not how life goes. You cannot insulate yourself from pain and failure and disappointment because that's just a part of life. But there I was attempting it anyway. I did have a brief awakening at 14 when I found a small core group of my best friends. There were 4 of us, and we would spend time in nature and talk about philosophy and the meaning of life. And we would write poetry and perform poetry at coffee bars and do full moon rituals. And we were just really attuned to each other and to nature. And it was just a really beautiful, sweet moment in my teenage life. But then I found a boyfriend and experienced sexual assault, and I started drinking really heavily. And by the end of my sophomore year, I was an alcoholic and had contemplated suicide. It was just really rough. And so it's like this. This is how it is for so many of us, right? It's like there's all this chaos and sadness and anxiety with moments of joy and fun and playfulness. And meanwhile, you're grinding, you're working, you're going through the motions of your day. And it's all just like dysregulated and disharmonized and like a blanket of confusion and distraction. It's just not really living at all. But then a big awakening came. And that was when my grandpa died in 2010. That was my first profound experience with death. And when he died, it became really clear to me that life does not go on forever. And it was an invitation for me to really look at how am I living my life? Like, what am I even doing here? And then, of course, I already had this beautiful connection with my grandmother, but seeing her lose her husband of over 50 years, I made a promise to him, like, I'm going to take care of grandma. She will not be alone. She has taken care of me for these last 26 years. Now I will help take care of her. And again, going back to this definition of what a spiritual awakening is it's this revelation that broadens your understanding of life. It broadens your perspective. It shifts things. And so when my grandpa died, it shifted my perspective. How am I living my life? What is going on? What is important to me? So connecting with my grandmother with this understanding that she's not going to be here forever, it wove in this beauty and this richness and this deep love. And we felt closer in those last 4 years of her life than I had ever felt to her. And she was such an exquisite example of unconditional love. I mean, as I said in a previous episode, she never judged me. She never shamed me or argued with me about how I felt. She just listened, and she would be this very grounding presence of love and compassion and acceptance. And so I decided, like, I want my grandma to live as long as possible. She was diabetic. She had a lot of health issues. And so I thought, okay, I'll lead by example. I'm going to take charge of my life. And so I started eating whole foods and exercising and just kind of getting a grip on my physical health. And even though I was trying so hard to encourage my grandmother into healthier habits, her body was just so tired and she became cyclically ill. And I understood that she was not going to be here forever. So she died, and I went into profound grief. I completely abandoned all of the healthy living routines that I had established. And a month later, when I'm just starting to feel like, okay, I need to get back to living and start figuring out how I'm going to process this grief, then my other grandmother dies in Florida. That cracked me wide open. Whoever I was before then was dead and gone. I was a ghost of my former self, just an empty shell. 1 year later, one grueling year of fighting for my life, fighting to reclaim my health and my determination to not slip back into my old habits and storylines, I find myself sitting on the floor at my teacher's feet. It had been only 6 months after that first yoga class that I found myself signed up for a 200-hour yoga teacher training program at From the Heart Yoga and Tai Chi Center. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew to my bones that life would never be the same. So I'd like to invite you to do a stillness practice with me called a contemplation. Pause this if you're in the middle of driving or doing something, and grab a pen and a piece of paper and find a quiet place to sit. I'll ask you a question, and I want you to let it roll around in your mind. Don't try to answer it by thinking. Instead, see what arises. And I'll invite you to write unedited what came up. We'll begin as we always do, finding a comfortable seat, maybe using a blanket or a pillow or a chair, resting the feet flat on the ground if you're seated, feeling your sitting bones root into the ground or the chair as you lengthen the spine upward through the crown, slightly toning the belly as you broaden the back body, welcoming the breath in and out the nose, just turning your attention inward, focusing on the breath. Asking yourself the question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Opening the eyes, whatever arose from within you, Just write it unedited. I'm curious what came up for you when you asked yourself this question: who am I? How permanent do you think your self-definition is? Have you always thought that this is who you are? Who would you like to be? How would you like to show up in the world? Are you your thoughts? Who are you really? Are you just your function or your role or your titles? Or is there something more, something deeper? Who are you at your essence? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really loving these conversations with you, and I hope you're loving them too. I look forward to connecting with you again and deepening this journey together. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.